Today, I'd like to speak to you all about emptiness. I thought I'd pick the easiest topic possible. Emptiness. We've all heard about emptiness. First, let me say good morning to the Venerables and good morning, friends. I hope everyone is doing well. We often study and chant a sutra known as the Heart Sutra. One of the core elements of that sutra is that emptiness is form and form is emptiness. This means all phenomena are empty of any inherent existence. It seems so simple, doesn't it? So I should stop here and just ask, are there any questions? No, I won't. The Heart Sutra also speaks of the need to see the five aggregates as empty. The five aggregates are form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. We have our 3 grandchildren this week because my daughter decided to go down and meet the hurricane in Florida, and my 6-year-old granddaughter just came in. So if you're hearing any noises, those are not me. Those are my 3 grandkids. So as I said, the 5 aggregates we all know: form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. These make up the human being, but they're empty of an inherent existence. This means the I, the me, the mine, the self is also empty. And all phenomenon, all conditioned phenomenon are empty. As I recall from Buddhist studies in our diploma class, the only phenomenon which is unconditioned is nirvana or nirvana. Now, somebody that graduated in front of me in the class hierarchy, maybe they can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But emptiness is not an easy concept to grasp. The great Mahayana teacher, Nagarjuna, from the 1st century Common Era, he said that emptiness, wrongfully grasped, is like picking up a poisonous snake from the wrong end. You're liable to get bitten. It's important to understand that emptiness is not nihilistic. It doesn't mean complete nothingness. The Dalai Lama calls emptiness the true nature of things and events. But he also cautions us to avoid the misapprehension that emptiness is an absolute reality or an independent truth. It's similar to the Buddha's teaching of building a raft to get across the sea. Once you reach the other side, you no longer need the raft, so you abandon it. The teacher Suzuki indicates that emptiness is not to be taken as voidness. Again, nihilism. There is something But that something is something which is always prepared for taking some particular form. He went on to say, and I like this quote a lot because it seems to personalize emptiness. Emptiness is like being at your mother's bosom. She will take care of you. The Dalai Lama says that emptiness is not a state of mind. It's the true nature of things and events. We can say the true nature of reality. Venerable Master Inshun, one of the greatest translators in the modern era, wrote a book called The Way to Buddhahood. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that book. We've studied it quite extensively. He describes emptiness as the true meaning of all things is emptiness, which is free from erroneous imagination. All things that sentient beings think are merely our conceptions of inherent nature and are meaningless elaborations. So those two phrases, conceptions of inherent nature and meaningless elaborations. That's talking about our minds spinning like a hurricane, this discursive papancha, this discursive thought. Only the emptiness of things without any nature is reality. Inshun goes on to say that it's said in the sutras that the nature of all things cannot be attained. The nature of all things cannot be attained, and this is the inherent nature of all things. This true meaning is undifferentiated emptiness of the self and the emptiness of all things. So it's a dual truth. It's similar to a grass fire and a charcoal fire, he says. Although these fires burn different substances, they are of the same nature. He goes on to say that wisdom which realizes the true nature of the Dharma is wisdom that once attained is never lost. Kind of like riding a bicycle. Once you get it, you never lose it. One should not be attached to the self, this I and mine, let alone any other things, any other phenomena. Understand sentient beings and the emptiness of things are ultimately identical in concept. That is, for those who can realize the non-existence of the self and the I or mine or me will definitely be able to grasp and understand the emptiness of things. Ajahn Jeff, who's spoken to us several times now and will be back soon, he says that emptiness is a way of perceiving what is experienced. He calls it a mode of perception. In this mode, we add nothing to and take nothing away from the reality of physical and mental events. You look at reality as it plays out in the mind with the senses without creating a construct of whether anything lies behind this reality. This mode, as we call it, as Ajahn Jeff calls it, the mode of perception, can be called emptiness precisely because it is without preconceived ideas or notions, which the mind inevitably, universally, the mind that's without training adds to this experience to make sense out of what is happening from the perspective of I, because it's all about me, right? These mind dramas are stories. We add these self-constructed stories that help us to fit into what we perceive as our world. Many times these stories are painted positive so that we come out on the top. But oftentimes the stories will be just the opposite. But realize that these stories that we create, these hurricane dramas in our mind, do nothing more than distract our attention, or perhaps redirect our attention away from how actual events influence each other in the present. For example, imagine that you're at let's say you were lucky enough to get tickets to see the Dodgers against the Cardinals, if any of you are baseball fans, and Albert Pujols makes baseball history, only the fourth person in history to hit 700 home runs. But then imagine that Albert's at bat, 700 looming in the future, and suddenly a thick fog rolls in and descends, obscuring your vision. This is similar to what our mind does. We have a reality, we have truth, but the mind fogs that truth, covering and obscuring and bending that truth to fit our narrative. So we can see that the root cause of suffering, of dukkha, which we generally understand dukkha to be suffering or unsatisfactoriness, it all stems from these labels. If you find a child, a young, innocent child, they have no concept of I, me, or mine, but they're taught that. They're taught, my name is, and this is where I live, and I fit in this way. And they're kind of placed in a box, and we're all placed in that box. And the I, and I guess you could call it the ego, having this inherent existence, this belief in our minds that we have this inherent existence, that leads to attachment. It leads to anger, ill will, hatred, and other emotions, good or bad. The Dalai Lama has said, based on grasping the body and mind as inherently existent, grasping the I, which exists independent on them, as inherently existent, arises. Thus, this self-grasping, this holding on to this I, me, and mine, and other phenomena, is the root of all afflictions. This is called self-grasping ignorance. We use ignorance sometimes in the West. Of course, it's a derogatory term in many instances, But ignorance just means the lack of wisdom, the lack of knowledge, an untrained mind. So this grasping ignorance is called that because it misunderstands the ultimate nature of reality. And I think most all of us have this grasping ignorance. There's a second form of ignorance which doesn't understand karma and its effect. However, this grasping ignorance, this grasping onto the self and clinging to it, you might say clinging to it for all of our lives. This is the root of all cyclic existence. This grasping ignorance is not just a lack of wisdom regarding the final nature. It is an active misconception of it. The way ignorance apprehends persons and phenomena is totally opposite of the way they exist. It apprehends the opposite of what wisdom, realizing the ultimate nature, perceives. While ignorance grasps phenomenon as inherently existent, wisdom perceives those same phenomena to be empty of inherent existence. This ignorance is the first of the 12 links of dependent arising or origination. Nagarjuna asserted that the root of samsara is the ignorance grasping inherent existence, while the antidote that eliminates it is the direct realization of the emptiness of inherent existence. The Dalai Lama said that yogis begin their journey by examining how the self exists. Could the self that thinks and feels exist objectively? The self that is the object itself. Grasping ignorance, can it exist? By investigating and reasoning how the self exists, these yogis, and also us, can conclude that it cannot truly exist. Any mind that erroneously grasps an object self, an objective self, cannot be manifest at the same time as the wisdom that sees the non-existence of an object, because these two minds are mutually exclusive, they're contradictory. Wisdom is the power to overcome ignorance, because wisdom is the correct mind, whereas ignorance is erroneous. This is where the training comes in. By repeatedly familiarizing yourself with the wisdom, realizing the emptiness of an object, the emptiness of the self, grasping the afflictions that depend on it and their seeds, they're gradually eliminated. And samsara will eventually be brought to an end. Unfortunately, there's no chart on how long that takes. The Dalai Lama went on to say that ignorance grasps persons and phenomena as inherently existent. That is, they exist from their own side, independent from all other factors. This view is erroneous because the fact is everything exists dependent on other factors, including by thought and name. Although all phenomena exist by being imputed or designated or posited by the mind, ignorance, this grasping ignorance, apprehends or sees them exactly in the opposite way, as having their own inherent existence, as existing under their own power, with their own inherent nature. That's why by eliminating this ignorance, all the afflictions that depend on it are stopped. Just as, for example, uprooting a tree, pulling the roots all the way out of the ground will kill the tree, the branches, the leaves, everything. Thoughts of I and mine refer to the wrong view of a personal identity that grasps I and mine. When and if we can extinguish these afflictions, then the afflictions and the polluted karma will cease. Without the afflictions and polluted karma, both in samsara, the 11th of the 12 links of dependent origination cannot occur. If we watch the process of mind, you recognize that the hurricane starts with the labels, I, me, and mine. The drama spins more and more, gets bigger and bigger, and the destruction and the inability to step back and unravel the actual cause of the suffering gets worse and worse. The method to preventing or defeating the suffering before it spins out of control is adopting this emptiness mode or emptiness way of thinking. Instead of reacting to whatever emotion your mind presents, whatever scenario spins, Master Jiru tells us to step back or pull back from mind. I'll never forget the first time that Master Jiru told us to pull back from mind. I thought I was going to fall over backwards when I pulled back. I could see my mind. I could see myself pulling back from it. It was quite amazing. We pull back from the mind and become the observer of the mind. If we look, Corey, can you put up the slide from Beth Jacobs, 17 steps of a full perception? Because according to Buddhist psychology, there are 17 steps in a full perceptual moment. These are laid out in the Abhidharma. Beth Jacobs was one of our professors. She's a doctor that lives in Chicago, and she taught us about the Abhidharma along with a Bhante, and I can't remember if it was Bhante Kusala. I can't remember his name, but they were co-teachers of our Abhidharma class. And Beth has written a book that I'll hold up. It's called basically the Buddhist psychology. It's the original Buddhist psychology contained in the Abhidharma. And we were taught from the Theravadan Abhidharma. There are two different Abhidharmas, and Beth is an expert on the Theravadan Abhidharma. So you can see the 17 steps, and I put these up only because I mentioned them. I would recommend that you get Beth's book, The Original Buddhist Psychology, if you want to study more about these perceptual moments. Beth says that we know we are onto something when there is a convergence of detailed descriptions of this process, the 17 steps, from such different sources, whether from contemplative 4th century BCE wanderers in India or technology-driven scientists of the 21st century. Much as a knowledge of the aggregates is useful when thinking about reality construction, Having a feeling for this list, the 17 steps, opens the experience of perception. To know where perception turns into reactivity and activity can help us understand the complexity of many human actions. If we can notice it, we can intervene. And that's the secret. If we can notice it, we can intervene. That slight inhale upon seeing something, experiencing something as a moment when we can refresh perception and stay in the present instead of letting the flood of past associations, the discursive thinking, the papancha, the hurricane of thought, keep us in repetitive cycles. We can make decisions more mindfully. So the idea is to catch the perception at about the midpoint before the mind has a chance to color, textualize, add judgment, presuppositions. And this is a learned experience or skill. The ability to watch the process of mind as a series of independent events allows us to recognize anger, hatred, ill will, jealousy, really any emotion, whether positive or negative, because all of that colors our judgment. Some people see Trump and they think nothing but good. Other people see Trump, they think nothing but bad. How many people can step back before that judgment enters? It happens. The 17 steps of perception, according to Dr. Jacobs, happen, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it's a quarter of a second, I think. So this mastering the perception fits right into this emptiness mode, which allows us an ability to see and understand this concept of emptiness. And the mode can be used in all human experience. We use this mode, we are seeing reality as it is without the label of I, me, or mine, because we realize those labels are the very things that cause suffering and stress. A. John Jeff says that in order to use this mode of perception, it takes practice. It takes training. But we know from recent science, probably in the last 10 years, from Richard Davidson and his research on neuroplasticity, that the mind, no matter what age it's at, can be changed. And the way to change it is repeated conduct. The training is vital for whether the mind will be sucked into the hurricane story and dream creation, which can perpetuate inaccurate views. I mean, not always, but I think if we looked at it on a scale, it would be a very high percentage. A. John Jess says the training is in virtue, concentration, and discernment. Loosening the attachments to these views and stories which leave the mind empty of greed, delusion, thereby eliminating suffering and stress. And I wanted to kind of go over, if we have time, a few minutes. I'm probably over now, but let me just give you a flavor of where this moment in time of perception, where we can recognize and intervene in the thought process based on our training. Beth talks about the next 3 steps: receiving, investigating, and determining as the meat of perception. The stimulus is taken in, qualities are noted, and the object's definition starts to form. Mental objects such as memories and creative imagination enter the perpetual process at determining, although they are not determined through analysis of sensory data. So I guess I would end by saying that this is what we're training for, really. This is a concept that is very difficult to understand and explain. I hope that this talk helped somebody to learn a little bit about emptiness and non-self, and placed a seed that perhaps you'll investigate the Abhidharma and the compendium of consciousness that's contained in the Abhidharma, where it lays out specific meditative techniques for both types of meditation that we use now, even today. So I feel like this is incomplete, very incomplete, but I hope it sparks some curiosity. Thank you.